I would say that the most important thing for my judge when I was judging was what script was displayed the most skill in terms of the fundamentals. You know, there's no value to winning a competition and then having somebody who has career experience have to like explain to you something that you should have known already from a book.
I really kind of want to go back. I always love starting with this, even further back than screenwriting. How did you even get interested in cinema and TV and movies in the first place? Like when you think back to like your childhood or whatever, what is that first thing that you think sparked your interest in this industry?
That's a really far back question. I have parents who really love movies and specifically mystery television. So I grew up in a home where people really loved stories and storytelling. And I was always a very outgoing kid who really enjoyed kind of attention. And so in my early years, I gravitated towards wanting to be the center of attention and thinking that like being an actor would be the way to do that. And so I spent my high school years, I'm from Canada, so I was in a arts high school. And if you went to the school, you had to audition to go, and there were dance majors and music majors and visual art majors. And then there were drama majors, and I was a drama major. And it was kind of, I think the thinking of it at the time was that it was a great place for me to kind of channel my energy and to find a place to be outgoing and be goofy and, talk about things I really enjoyed. And yeah, I mean, I've always been specifically a big fan of, like independent cinema as well as like mainstream. And so from a very early age, and before I even went to university, I knew that I wanted to be in the arts. I probably didn't know about writing specifically for the screen until I got to university, but it was early on, and I kind of had a one-track mind.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I love that. It's always it's just when you get that first spark when you're so young, you know what I mean? It's just like, that's such a good way to go about it. And then, so you went to drama school. I'm curious. So you went to York University. Did you go specifically for drama? Like was it drama? What did you major in?
So my path was actually from high school. I went to Vancouver. I went to UBC, the big university there. And I did a creative writing degree there. I did a BFA in creative writing. And in doing creative writing, I also studied things like playwriting, and I don't think I took poetry, but my friends took poetry, radio drama, novel writing, short story writing. And one of those that I pursued more heavily than the others was screenwriting. I worked with screenwriters who were Vancouver locals, essentially, who were making films and writing, and were working in the film department at UBC as well. And then when I finished at UBC, I did my grad degree at York. So I came all the way back to Ontario, and I went to York because York was the only place. UBC had one too, but because I just finished there, I didn't want to do my grad degree there as well. So I went to York because they're the only place in Canada that had a screenwriting MFA. Now, this is like turn of the millennium. So this is a long time ago now, 20 years ago. I'm sure there are more screenwriting programs now, but at the time there was only this one at the grad school level. And it had some very specific professors in the department there who were focusing on how to write feature screenplays. And I couldn't think of anything I wanted to do more.
So that's what I wanted to ask you is like, when did specifically screenwriting come into the picture? Like, what was your first introduction to a screenplay or reading a screenplay or kind of getting interested in that?
My first introduction was at UBC. It was with Peggy Thompson. She taught a big lecture on introduction to the screenplay. And I had been toiling away as a playwright and, short story writing, and screenwriting was introduced to me. Peggy, her approach was like to teach the hero's journey. And so a Joseph Campbell model that is very clear, quest oriented. And we did assignments where you kind of learned what screenwriting was in terms of like how much description you needed to actually put on the page. When you write, a novel or a short story, you're like describing the whole room, or you're describing everything the person's wearing. And in screenwriting, you're just kind of you're implying and kind of being evocative. And there's a really big difference in how you describe things. And so that was my first introduction to it. And I was so turned on by the idea that there was a very clear craft to doing it. There was no like, just do whatever you want, which was like every other writing form essentially, which is fine and great and people love, but I was not. I have more of a puzzle brain, and screenwriting.
I feel the same way. Like I'm so attracted to screenwriting. Like I say this all, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I'd love to get to know what you think about this, but I hear, you kind of hear this a lot in screenwriting circles, that a screenplay is just a blueprint, which a screenplay is a blueprint. It's a blueprint for a movie, but I see it as more than that. To me, it's so much more than just a blueprint. Like it's like poetry to me. But what are your thoughts, especially coming from like learning about a hero's journey too, just diving into that a little bit. But we're already going kind of deep and broad with this, which is fine with me, but what is like your philosophy behind screenwriting? Do you see it as your goal is like, I'm just writing a blueprint for a movie, or do you think of it as more than that?
I mean, if you're lucky, you're writing a blueprint for a movie, but the movie part or the TV shooting of the episode is so far away from the screenwriting, especially early on and especially in features. And so if you're only writing a blueprint for a movie, then you're kind of, that's a strange way of looking at it. And additionally, people read your screen. So you're writing for a reader. You're writing for someone who's reading. So you have to be kind to them and thoughtful of what the process of reading and imagining. And, actual screenwriting is kind of two things. There's like the process of how you write the words on the page, which is undeniably an important part of screenwriting. But the other part of writing, and the part that in TV writing typically you do as a group, is like the actual deciding of what the story is, what the scenes are, how do those scenes progress, how do those scenes reverse, what is the conflict that runs throughout, what gets resolved, what questions are we asking. That kind of work underneath what goes on the page is so much more important than what goes on the page, to be honest. If you were to read, and I'm sure most people do who are trying to break in, if you read professional screenplays, some of the best and some of the most successful films have been written from screenplays that are not particularly poetic. They're actually very functional. But the actual screenwriting, the actual craft of crafting a story, creating characters, figuring out how to introduce them, and just to put them in opportunities to show their character, that's the real screenwriting. Like that's the real work, and that's what differentiates a good piece of drama. And so if you're only looking at it as like, how straight are the lines in my architecture blueprint, then like, I guess there is some craft to that. But the real craft is, I think, more intellectual and of course creative, but is kind of the work that goes before you do any of the actual writing.
Yeah, man, I love that. We're diving into stuff already, and I really want to come back to process stuff, but just to go back a little bit to like you getting into screenwriting. So, so after college, or actually, I would love to get your thoughts on this. We have in the ScreenCraft community, we have people that go to college, people that don't go to college. We get the question all the time, like, do I need to go to film school? Do I need to like go to take a screenwriting course? And of course it's, there's good and bad of both, but what is your philosophy coming out of learning about it at that level, higher education? Like, what are your thoughts, or what tips do you have for people that are kind of in that position where they're kind of determining, should I go, should I not go? Is it necessary? What is your quick thoughts on that?
My quick thoughts are, I went to school in Canada, and so the financial toll it took on me was much less than it might have been had I been in the United States. So that's a consideration that you should take very seriously, because going to get a grad degree in screenwriting, if it's going to cost you $50,000, like, I don't know, is that a good investment? Maybe not. Additionally, the people who taught me screenwriting in those places were like teaching me, like a lot of the people who were in those environments are Peggy, actually, who I already referenced, was one of the few people who maybe is different, but like, they're like teachers and professors who are not necessarily they understand screenwriting from like a teaching perspective, I suppose, but they're not actually screenwriting in a really super active way. I don't mean to be derogatory to people who are doing that job. It's a very important job. I appreciate all of them, but
I know what you mean. I know
yeah.
exactly.
And so there's a somewhat of a kind of, learning in a vacuum, because screenwriting is a part of a business. It's part of an entertainment industry. Those are factors that you actually do need to consider when you're writing. So I didn't just go to grad school. I, after that, went to the Canadian Film Center. I was, a part of the National Screen Institute feature writing program. I did so many other practical programs that were guided towards becoming a professional screenwriter that did not end at grad school. Gotcha. And grad school, in a lot of ways, was like you got to learn the theory behind screenwriting or the theory behind certain things, but it was up to you really to implement it in a effective, propulsive way. And I needed to go to do those programs. I needed to know that I had exhausted every learning opportunity before I became a professional. That was very important to me personally. Is that important to other people? I don't know. Like, is it like, I wanted to be able to tell people I was doing something. I was like, I liked the prestige of it. I liked being in an academic setting. I liked that it bought me a bit of time to work on my craft. And in some ways you can tell the difference between people who know there's like a deeper level of, kind of knowledge sometimes, not always. And I know lots of people who didn't and are fantastic writers and learned from reading screenplays. So, I don't know what works for you. What investment are you ready for? It certainly doesn't guarantee anything. So you have to do it because you love it.
Yeah, it's good advice. Like me extrapolating a little bit from what you just said, which is like, one, just self-aware, be self-aware. Like you got to know, like, what do you need? What do you want? Yeah. That's always so important. But also I love what you said. Like you took way more action than just going to school thinking like, oh, this is going to be it. Like you did all these other things. Cause that's an issue that even some of my friends, I live in LA, and even some of my friends here, like that go to programs, it's like they think that's going to be the answer, and it's like you're going to get a wake up call. Like it's so competitive, like you got to do more. So, you know.
Yeah. And now also at the time that I did this, there was so few screenwriting books. There were so few that, I think there was Sid Field. I think Peggy taught Sid Field's, book. And there maybe was one or two others, especially in TV writing. But now there's like an entire shelf, if not more, at the bookstore. Like a lot of the information that I was learning and paying for in school, to be honest, is in books. So, and in programs like ScreenCraft. So, I don't know if I would recommend it to anybody, to be honest, but it was what worked for me.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate, you being honest about it. It's good advice. Okay. So college, learning, taking action, doing all these things. What was kind of the next step? Like, what was that next step after you graduated and you really were out in the real world? Like, what was the next step that you did to like start getting that momentum?
Right. So I am not connected to the film industry or entertainment industry in my familial life or in my social life in any way before I went along on this journey. I didn't have an uncle who worked anywhere. I didn't, nothing. And so one of the ways that I combated that, or I made myself feel less insecure about it, was I joined all of these programs to like figure out how to break in. And you have to keep in mind, I was doing this in Canada. And so this is a different, the industry is different in Canada. Everything about it is different. It's a smaller pool, et cetera, et cetera. But what I did was I went, at the time, there was a program at the Canadian Film Center, which is kind of like Canada's AFI. And they essentially give you 6 months where they teach you how to be a professional screenwriter. Excuse me. And that entails how to take a meeting, how to get an agent, what to talk to your agent about, how to read a contract, how to write a screenplay that a director will direct the way you want them to direct it, how to work with producers. There's like a big professional element to that program. And as a result of that, I met my Canadian agent, who was one of the people who came to speak to us. I think she was our very last speaker in the year that we were there. And I connected with her after, and she came to represent me. And I spent the first year out of the film center writing, taking lots of meetings. So meeting with directors and producers who were all over Toronto. And I began writing feature scripts and working jobs that paid me so that I could keep, paying my rent, but I wasn't being paid for writing.
Gotcha.
Uh,
I want to ask you about that because
yeah,
it's so interesting. You worked at the
yeah,
largest private investigation firm in
yeah,
Canada. Like,
yeah,
to me,
yeah,
that sounds so freaking cool. Like,
yeah,
it seems awesome. What was that
yeah.
like? And
Uh,
did anything come out of that helped you with screenwriting? Because people and like the psychology of it, I'm just curious to hear a little bit about it.
Yeah. Well, one of those, I worked the jobs that I did before I finally was making my living as a writer were like I was typically an usher, or I worked in front of house or box offices, or that type of work. And then when we moved back to Vancouver, I needed work, and I couldn't. I wanted jobs that I was just talking to another young writer about this. I wanted a job where it took nothing from my brain so that I could just think about writing or secretly write while I was at work. So like I worked in parking booths and, just so that I could do the job and then also write while my job, I'm not doing my job.
Yeah.
And I was looking for a job like that. And I was in such a dark place that I was looking on Craigslist, which is almost, why would I be looking on Craigslist? Except I guess the job market in Vancouver was very small. So I was looking on Craigslist, and there was a job I looked at the writer section. There was a job that said, writing reports, writer wanted for reports, discretion required. And I was like, ooh, discretion required. So I sent my resume, was curious what it was. And it was a private investigation firm that did both insurance fraud and then also personal investigation stuff. So like, people who want to know what their child is up to, what their daughter's new boyfriend is doing. He's fishy. I think my wife's having an affair. I'm going away.
Wow.
Can you follow her? That kind of stuff. And I learned so much, to be honest. It'd be impossible for me to say how much it affected me. It affected me a great deal. The people were really kind to me. They were very different than me in a lot of ways. A lot of them were retired police officers. And the job was really goofy at times. There were a lot of funny things that we got up to and that the people who were out in the field got up to. But I wasn't an investigator. I was the one who transcribed and wrote the reports that they brought back from their time in the field.
That is so interesting. I mean, to me, it's romantic because of Chinatown. Like, I just think of
sure.
one of the best screenplays, like just a classic screenplay, and anytime you ask, like, what's one of the best screenplays? Everyone says Chinatown, but that's so interesting to me. I mean, I can't imagine what it would have been like being in that environment and getting all that kind of information coming in, but that's really, but I love what you said. I just want to highlight this because that is such a good piece of insight for anyone who's really young right now, like just kind of starting to break in. Is you specifically, like, you consciously tried to find jobs that allowed you the energy to write, which is so smart. I mean, it's just like, that is a very smart way to think about it, like just making sure that you're taking care of the mental health that you need to be able to write,
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't making very much money in doing that, but it certainly worked itself out. I mean, some people, I guess if you're trying to break in and you're in LA, or you live in New York, or you live in another center of incredible, creation, being an assistant, that there are different paths that maybe are very taxing, but they have more benefit in the gains that you make in other areas. Those jobs weren't really kind of on my radar in Vancouver because I didn't want to be it wasn't like I was going to be an assistant and become a writer. It was like I'd be an assistant and then be an assistant to a producer. And I was like, I don't really want to be doing that. I want to, like I said, I want to focus on the actual work of writing. And I'm a very lucky person. I really love writing. So secretly, I would do it anyways. The fact that I get paid to do it, I'm very lucky. But
that's awesome. It's like good advice for if anyone's watching. Just if you can have that mentality about it. I mean, it's so helpful. All right. So I guess we can kind of jump around. I'm sure there's just so much that happened, but what was the first real job, the first real position that really got that momentum going for you? What was that experience? How did you land that job? Like, what was that like?
Yeah. So I'd written over probably 3 years. I'd been working on a bunch of feature scripts with different producers in Canada and had been the recipient of grants and development funds that had paid me chunks of money to write. So I had definitely been doing that type of work, all on projects, none of which came to fruition, obviously. But I had been doing work where I was paid here and there. So I had these wins that I felt were encouraging. But the first job that I got that was like the real deal was in narrative writing. I was hired as a story editor. So the very lowest junior story editor on a scripted show called Endgame. It was, the writer's room was going to be in Vancouver, and the show was kind of a chess player, had agoraphobia, and he was a genius. He was kind of a Sherlock Holmes character, and he would solve mysteries while from the suite of his hotel. So it was kind of at the era of Monk. So it had this light kind of Sherlock-y feel to it. And I got the job because someone I knew from the Canadian Film Center knew the showrunner. The showrunner said, I'm looking for a writer in Vancouver who's entry level. Do you know anybody? And she said, my friend Katherine. And so he reached out to my agent. My agent sent my samples. You know, how important samples are, I cannot overstate. Sent my samples. He read them, said they were great. I met with him. We hit it off. I joined the room. I did the show. It was a year, maybe 8 months, 10 months. And I worked with some of the greatest writers that I think are, you know, in Canada. I worked with really smart people, very kind people. It was a very good, positive experience at the beginning. I wrote a script and a half. I worked with Rachel Talalay, who directed Tank Girl. She was my first director. My second script was with Kari Skogland. Wow. I just was like thrown in, you know, making it this show with a bunch of really smart writers and a bunch of really kind people. And, you know, that's not always the case. People aren't always smart or kind. And so I feel think of it as a very, you know, lovely starting place for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, also just like, there's another one of the benefits from these programs and stuff, like that connection, that networking right there. And you must have left a really good impression on your friend, like for them to think of you to call. And then, okay, so you said you're a story editor. I'm just kind of curious, writers' rooms. I mean, I just while we're kind of here, I'd love for you to delve into a little bit, like, what's it like being in a writer's room? What's that environment like? And also just for there's people in our community that's their whole dream. That's what they do. You judge the TV pilot competition. So, you know, like right there, any advice or tips you have for someone coming in at an entry level, even a PA, like just at that entry level, what was that experience like for you? Any tips you have for like how you can get ahead, how you can kind of stand out, or anything like that? I would love to get your thoughts on.
Sure. I would say, you know, depending on the size of the show, depending on the episode order, depending on, you know, the kind of budget of the show, the size of the room is going to be different. In Canada, rooms are typically smaller and shorter, so you don't necessarily have as many staff or as many entry level positions that you have in LA. On Endgame, that show that I joined, I was the youngest writer, and we had a script coordinator. And he also, I don't think he took notes in the room. I don't think in Canada we have writers' assistants who type every word, which we have in LA. But Jeremy, he was fantastic. He's actually become a, you know, very successful writer himself. So he was really reliable and really good troubleshooter. And he, for the most part, I think he was very quiet, despite having probably very strong opinions. And then there were probably like maybe 7 or 8 writers, because I think we did 13 episodes. And in, you know, on the show that I'm on now, so I'm on The Handmaid's Tale now, we have, I think, 10 writers, maybe 9 writers. And we have a writer's PA, we have a writing assistant, we have a script coordinator, and we also have and then the actual writers in the room start, I think, at story editor. And go up to executive producer. So those positions are staggered based on experience, based on your credits. Your lawyer or your agent negotiates what your credit will be. And although a writer's room is a place where the best idea wins, and of course we're a team, and you know, there's also there is kind of unspoken, invisible rules about how to operate in those spaces. And the person whose opinion matters most is the showrunner. And that person has hired you for a reason, and they have not hired you to make your version of the show. They have hired you to make their version of the show. So your ability to hear what they want, to hear what pitches they respond to hear what themes they're curious about and want to work on in the show, characters that they're drawn to, storylines that they find compelling, shows that they're watching that they either want to be inspired by or stay away from. The showrunner really sets the tone. And then when you're lucky enough to either be an assistant who sits on the, listening and taking notes and doing administrative tasks, while also maybe, if given a chance and asked for their opinion, can chime in. For the most part, you're listening. And I would say that the most important quality of someone at that level is that not to talk unless what you're going to say is going to blow the room in half. There really is no excuse for someone in a position like that talking too much or really much at all. Not because you don't have great ideas. I'm sure you have great ideas. It's just that there are people in the room who are laser focused on getting this done in a certain speed and with a certain, kind of method. And sometimes it can be very disruptive to have kind of like a free for all of anybody just speak your mind. Now, if you have a great idea, if you have a story to tell about your personal life that is genuinely going to rock everybody in the room, you should have the guts to say it. But you should also know when it's appropriate to not to keep. And for the most part, that job is very hard because you want to say a lot and you're not really, it's not really your job to be doing that. Now, if you want to stand out in that job, I'll say this about everything and every part of the film industry. I think most people would agree is the best way for you to move ahead is to do the job you've been given really, really well. Right. So if your job is to get coffee, if your job is to, get office supplies, if your job is to take notes, if you focus on doing that really well and always having, time and availability and flexibility and all of that, those are qualities that people want around them. And anyone who is, kind of always looking ahead from the job that they're doing, it's very hard to kind of want to bring someone who can't hide their ambition, because of course you're ambitious. We're all ambitious. Of course you're as, a writing assistant because you want to be a writer. We already know that. If you're not, why are you doing the job? So you don't need to constantly, and you should also never ask people to read your work in the room or take up that space. But what you want to do is endear yourself to the writers in the room so that they feel like they want to shepherd you up. And if you're lucky enough, one of them, which happens to be honest all the time, says, why don't you send me that script I know you're working on, maybe I can give you some notes, or maybe and then they'll maybe find, if someone asks them, do you know a young writer? I need someone, I need a lower level for this job. Hopefully your name will pass through. And so, a lot of it is about listening and learning and being ready when your moment comes to be. I think that's the most important advice I could give.
I love it. Yeah. Listening. And then just the way that I kind of think about that. I mean, hiding your ambition is kind of a good way to put it, because it's a given, right? Everyone in there, like you said, but having gratitude for the position you're in too. That's something I think about all the time. Me just going through what I'm going through right now is sometimes it can be so easy to not be grateful for the millions of people try to break into this industry. So if you even get a job as a PA or at the lowest level, be grateful for it. Most people will never even get that shot, right? I mean, that's the truth, I mean,
that's true for all of us. We should all be grateful. We're all very lucky to be doing this job. It's it's a privilege, and that's true for all of us. That gratefulness is.
So we're already 30 minutes in, and this is flying by. Kind of want to get into process a little bit, because you write, you've been working, you do TV, you've been in writers' rooms. So I see you have a feature now, or you're working on a feature, or I saw something in your email about a feature, because I want to get your thoughts on the difference in your process, or just the way that you go about writing a feature versus being in a room. And I know for me, it's so interesting, writers' rooms, like you were saying a little bit earlier, breaking a story, how that even happens in a writer's room with breaking a story, ideas, pitching ideas. So I guess a cool place to start would be how do you even generate ideas for yourself in general, features, TV? What is that process like for you? Because we get all the time, so many people talk about, how do you even come up with ideas? How do you know an idea is good? So what is kind of at the very fundamental level, how do you even start with when you know an idea is good, or how you even start generating ideas?
You know, a good idea is hard to come by. So they're not, you know, they're not easy to find. I have some writer friends who are incredibly prolific in their ability to be generate ideas at an incredible pace. I don't have that ability in terms of like a full idea that's going to be a full story. I think I'm a bit faster in terms of like generating ideas for what this moment could be, or what is the scene between these two people, or what's the theme of this episode, or how can we reverse this episode. I think in those ways my brain works quickly. But when it comes to like what story do you want to tell, I would say you want to gravitate towards the type of films, if you want to write a film that you love, that you want to watch, because you're going to have to watch every single movie in that genre so that you can be educated in what's come before you, and then break them all down, figure out how they work. If you want to write a romantic comedy, you should have watched the top 25 romantic comedies. You need to understand how they work. You know, why are they the most loved? And so there's kind of like an education that has to happen. And I don't like horror movies. I don't watch horror movies. I don't like getting scared. So if I were to write a horror movie, I can't think of that's a horror movie. The idea of me having to write a horror movie. So, you know, write what you love. With film writing, you are really on your own. You know, I have a manager who's incredibly incredible, and he is a really valuable sounding board for me. And, you know, the few friends that I have who I would ever, you know, have the gall to ask them to read my work, who will give me feedback. But for the most part, writing a feature on your own, if you don't have a writing partner, is incredibly solitary work. There's so much self-doubt. There's so many reasons to stop and give up. And, you know, all of that interior talk that writers, we all battle of like, am I good enough? Is this idea dumb? Has this been done 40 times? Is this derivative? Is this brand new? Or am I just, you know, tired, you know, whatever all that interior monologue of like forcing yourself to like keep at it and giving yourself pep talks. That's feature writing. And there is an entire, feature industry and the television industry are two separate industries. I know that people think they are together, and in some ways they kind of are, but like but actually how they function, the people in them, what is expected of you, they're very, very different. Similar to like novel writing, that's a whole different industry, and film and TV are whole different industries where sometimes there's overlap, but for the most part, they're actually not overlapped at all. Yeah. And so learning how to write a feature, learning how to compete in the feature market, understanding how it works, what a script needs to do, who needs to be attached at what phase. It's a long, very difficult process, and one that, to be honest, I'm still, you know, kind of like figuring out myself, and is one that can be very rewarding and lucrative, but is also a very long road. Now, TV writing, on the other hand, is something where you get to have almost no experience, and then like through mentorship and through experience, you get to learn from other writers while doing your job and moving up the rungs of experience. The best analogy for a writer's room and an effective writer's room, I would say, is like a really great, like a team sport. I grew up playing team sports, so I'm very familiar with that person's really good at jumping high. That person's really fast. That person's really brave and will dive for the ball or whatever. Everybody has a skill that when we come together, we make something all in sequence that's like kind of got some groove to it. And a good writer's room is almost identical to that. You have a leader, you have a coach, you have a team captain, you have people who are there just to keep morale up. You have people who are really good at structure. You have some people who are really good at character, some people who are really good at like zany ideas. And like in a really good, well-balanced room, all of those people work well together and create something all together that we've all built together. Now, that actual process of it, I don't know if you're actually asking me how we break episodes and things, but it depends if you're writing a enclosed episode of TV, like if you were writing an episode of Law and Order, then you might not have to consider all of the things that came before it and that go after it. Maybe there's a few lines of, dialogue between the leads referring to their lives outside of work. But for the most part, it's a closed system. Whereas when you're writing in storytelling that's more kind of like each episode is a chapter of let's say a 10 chapter novel, then you can't decide what's in this chapter, episode 3, or this chapter, episode 7, unless you know what the whole book is about, unless you know the whole story. And so you can't break episodes until the work has been done on every character arc. What are the themes of this season? What's the starting point? What's the ending point? How are those, oppositionally different? Because you're always trying to, in my opinion, reverse ideas. You're always trying to start one place and end in a very different oppositional place, and yet feel like we got there in a surprising way. And that's hard to do. So you kind of spend a lot of time talking as a group. I mean, group skills are your most important skills. Writer skills are almost secondary to your group skills. You're listening, you're building, your ability to take feedback. If you pitch something and it doesn't land, you have to be able to pitch the next thing. And it's very, a place where you can thrive when you're around good folk. And it's also a place where when leadership is, maybe not as it should be, or there's competition in the room, or there's lots of other varying factors, which of course, personalities, all of that stuff, can also be a really tough place. It can be a tough place where you don't feel supported and where breaking episodes is very difficult. So there's not really one answer, but that's kind of like a general overview of what the task is for a TV writer's room.
No, I love it. I love everything you're just going into. And I have a million questions if we had more time. But one thing, I guess, something you said, you kind of talked about this a little bit ago, and I took a note because I'm like, I want to get your thoughts on this. This is something I always like to talk about with everyone that I interview, because I think you went into it. I mean, you kind of nailed it. But everyone struggles with it. How do you deal with self-doubt? How do you deal with motivation, right? I mean, it's like writer's block. Like there's all these things that come with being a writer, that there is this stigma around mental health and writer's block and kind of motivation, especially when you don't have an agent, you don't have any prospects, and you're just writing on spec. Like it can be very tough. That's where most people give up, is like just even trying to finish their first script. What are your thoughts? What you're successful, like what are tips you have in helping with getting past writer's block or getting past self-doubt and all of these things?
I mean, you have to be a self-propelled individual. There's just no doubt about it. There's no version where anyone's going to come and phone you and say, where's that script you've been working on? You have to find the motivation from within. I would say I probably was driven by my desire to prove myself. And so I was never going to let it stop because I wanted to prove myself so badly. And so that was a motivating factor for me. Also wanting to be able to be paid to do it. That was really all I ever really, I mean, obviously I wanted success, but I really wanted to do it as my job. I didn't want to have another job. I wanted this to be my job. And that was motivating. Now, how do you deal with self-doubt? I that's different for everybody. For me personally, I just keep writing. I try my best. I find writing and creating really, really like energy generating. And I also find watching television and films that I think are brilliant very inspiring. So, I would go back to my favorite movies and watch them. And then when I'm finished watching it, I feel so excited to want to make my thing that I'm, whatever it is. So watch things that inspire you. The worst thing you can do in this industry, I think, is, listen, that's obviously not true, but what the worst thing you can do for your career is give up. So if you want to give up, give up. You have to figure out how to not give up. That's essentially your only task, because if you give up, then you definitely are not going to get what you want. If you keep going, you're still in the ring. It's kind of like running a marathon. How do you get to the end of the marathon? You keep running. You keep moving towards the end.
And what does like, getting a little bit philosophical, I guess, what is motivation to you? Like, what does it mean for you? Or do you have like a process? Do you have kind of a habit, like a ritual for on those days where it's like, man, I'm not having any good ideas, but I need to write? Or the pressure in a writer's room is insane. It can be like the pressure and deadlines. Yeah. What is it like? How, what do you do to kind of get that energy? I know you said watching stuff and that, watching stuff that inspires you, but what does motivation even mean to you? Like, if just quick thoughts on that too.
I'm a big proponent of ritual as a way to summon the muses. And so for me, that encompasses the time of day that I write, the room I write in. I used to write in coffee shops. Now I write in my home office for the most part. It involves the, type of coffee I have, how much water I have. It also involves I have a family, so I don't have all the time. I can't sit up all night writing. I need to be finished by a certain time. So I'm very motivated by blocks of time. And, when I look at my outline that I'm converting into a script, let's say that's what my task is, I give myself goals for the day of, I'm going to get to this place in the outline in the script. So and then when I get there, I get to be done. And, I am a completionist. So I love to cross things off my list. So when I finish the scene, I, feel the satisfaction of being finished that scene. And I'm not a procrastinator. I'm not a up all nighter. I'm an early riser, routine, kind of, person I do my job the way that an accountant sits down and adds numbers. You got to sit down and do your job. And the creative inspiration that people require, for me, that process goes in the very beginning phase of like, what is this about? But for the most part, a lot of my work is like, I'm already in the thing. I already work on the show. We've already agreed what the show is. So like, if someone's like, what could this episode be about? There are certain questions that you can use to trigger creativity. What would be this character's biggest fear? Who is this character most in conflict with? Who is this character secretly in love with? All of those kind of prompts that you can ask yourself to kind of generate ideas in the short. But some people don't have lots of ideas, and in the room they're mostly quiet. But when they do have an idea, it's like a huge big one that like rocks the whole day. So everybody's different in that way. I mean, actually writing a script and having ideas, they're not separate exactly, but they also are very different.
Yeah.
They're not the same thing.
Especially like from what I know about writer's room is especially like like Vince Gilligan, for example, just Breaking Bad. I've watched like every freaking interview from him, just his passion and what he goes into. But he often talks about like, when it's time to write the script, basically all the work is done. Yes. The outline is done. All the beats, all the emotional beats. So that is a different thing, which leads me to ask you just a little bit about outlining. Like, I would love to just get any tips or like any thoughts you have on that, because this is one of these things in our community and just in general, like there's a divide a little bit and I guess it's more specifically like feature writing. There's a divide with people who think I never outline. I just write. I just do it. And I'm like, I can't even imagine. Outlining has become so important for me, but there is that kind of divide of people who think outlining can hinder me from my creativity. And then there's the people that are like routine discipline, which I fall into that category. But what are your thoughts on outlining?
I mean, the thing about outlining is people who say they don't outline and they just like write. I mean, you must be in a place in your career where you don't have to deliver outlines to people, which maybe there are people at a very high level who have so much clout that they don't need approval. But even Steven Spielberg has to write a treatment and get the financiers to pay him. So, outlining first and foremost is like a part of the business. So like you can feel however you want about it, but like it's a part of the job. So you have to figure out how to do it. If you're writing your own material, maybe you don't have to do it. If you're the type of person who can just be such a genius that you can just come up with perfection, I mean, so be it. If you could do that, like who am I to say you shouldn't do that? I can't, to me is like the writing without a plan, without knowing the beats of the scene. And to be honest, when I experience writer's block and when I sit staring at my computer, it is always, always, always because I have not done enough work to figure out what the scene is about, where the scene should be taking place. Why are these characters in the scene anyways? What do they want out of it? It's because I've always referred to that scene as, oh yeah, that's the driving scene, or oh yeah, that's where they show up at the gala. And like, you kind of have always just been like, oh, that's that thing. And then you come to write it and you can't even, because you haven't done any of the work, because a good outline is not where it is and what they're wearing. A good outline is like, where does this character emotionally begin in the scene? Where are they going to emotionally end at the end of the scene? What is the conflict between this character and the other characters in the scene? What is the point of view of the other characters in the scene? What do they want out of the scene? That work, I don't know how you can do that while also trying to write the words into script format, and whereas in a TV writer's room, for instance, the reason Vince Gilligan can say that is because that work, the thing that you see on the cards when they break down the episodes, which I'm sure you've seen Breaking Bad cards look like most cards from most shows, is there's so much detail that went into the discussion that then gets summarized into what's on that card. and with the notes that have been taken, where every single writer in the room essentially has taken their chance to be like, oh, and then this, then he starts with this, and then he says this, and then they do this, and then of course that's when the big explosion happens, and then everyone's done it. So you have a run of what the scene is that by the time, and the reason for that is to reduce the length of time it takes to write scripts, because you got to write lots of them. So, you know, when you're sent off to outline and when you're sent off to script from a TV room, you should know what you're writing. And if you don't, it's because you're in an emergency and because you're so far behind that they're hoping you can just like deliver a script and pull it out of thin air. And all of those environments where I've worked where that's been the case, the show has been a nightmare. The quality has been very poor. The writers have been miserable. So that's not an ideal. When people have full outlines that are robust and detailed, and everybody's had a chance to chime in on what things should be and how the best version is, those shows make you feel secure. They make you feel like you're delivering the episode that the room brainstormed and came up with. It's not my episode of TV. I mean, like, I would love to think that every episode I've written is like exclusively my work, but of course that's ridiculous. It's the work of the room. And the outline is the synthesis of that you then convert into technical drama, like actually into the what words they're saying, what, you know, how the scene begins, where does it exactly end, which is artistry on your end. But there's very little wiggle room from a good outline to that. And I love it that way. That's how I like it.
I love going into this is so fun to me, like just talking about this level of like craft, like, and so, but I'm curious, I really do want to get to, we have not much time, but I do want to get to getting your thoughts on just judging competition, kind of any tips, but just quick advice. I can probably even make a good clip on social media for this, but like, what do you think is essential for an outline? What should someone think about when they're sitting down and it's time to outline? They've done a lot of development work. They have a good idea. Like, what are like the main elements that you think need to be hit on to make a good outline?
You need to be able to introduce your characters in a way where they feel fresh, where they feel real, where I understand who this character is and I understand what they want. If you can't introduce a character or put them in a scenario where their character is displayed, which is the more ideal version, then your outline is going to never connect because you don't have dialogue or snappy things to grab otherwise. So you need to actually know who your characters are and be able to write that in a way that is succinct and incredibly compelling. You also need to express very strong grasp of structure. If you're writing an outline for an episode of TV, you need to understand probably the 5-act structure with a teaser. Even if you're writing prestige drama that doesn't have commercials, you still essentially should be working within 5 acts. And so your outline should essentially show how you understand act structure, because act structure is very important, which is like I write hours. So like every 10 minutes is like a full act. So each 10 minutes should be a full sequence reversal. Your outline should show that you understand how an episode should be structured. And then it also should be evocative of the tone of the episode. Is this a heartbreaking episode? Is this an episode where someone's heart gets broken? Is this an episode where someone's betrayed and they're found out? Is this the episode where they lose their mom? Is this the episode where they discover that the heist didn't go the way they thought it would? Like, what is this episode about tonally? And then how is that tone and the theme? How do they play throughout? Those are kind of the big 4. Character, structure, theme, tone, and to do it quickly. And by quickly, I mean like in few pages. You know, like a good outline for TV is between 12 and 18 pages. 18 being really robust and everyone wants shorter outlines. And in a lot of ways, it should be like, what are the scenes?
That's what I was going to ask you. It was like,
like you would start with like a slug line, and then you say, I mean, you would never write in this scene, but like, you know, Jennifer enters, she has, you know, a bowl of fruit. She opens the kitchen door. She drops the fruit. It smashes everywhere. You know, I should be in the scene. The most important thing is you want people to keep reading. You want them to be like, oh, what is going to happen? Like, even a drama, even a comedy, you want to keep people reading. If it's dry, you know, some people call it a sales document, and I hesitate with the word sales because it's such a gross word, even though it's like probably accurate. But like, you got to write something with zing. You know, if you're writing if this sequence is going to be exciting, when I'm reading it, I should feel excitement. If this is meant to be romantic, if this is the character and her love interest's first kiss, in the outline, I should feel the emotions of that. And you should be pretty micro in the decisions that you've made for what that stuff is. You should never read an outline and be like, this is great and everything, but like, what's the episode about? You should be like, oh, I saw the episode. So that's what a good outline should be.
That's great. That's amazing. That's perfect. Like such a good breakdown of it. Okay, so we have about 5 more minutes. Just any like what judging these TV competitions, just quick preface for me, just to kind of explain some of the questions we have and stuff. It's one of these things where people always, because it's all relative, right? Every judge is different. Everyone has different taste. It's all relative. I guess the way that I would like to approach this question is, what tips do you have for people who are entering a contest? And I would love to get a little bit about your experience of just judging the ScreenCraft TV competition, but like, what tips do you have for someone to, what is the most important thing that people should try to get across to get people's attention? Like first 5 pages, first page, first 10 pages, and like, how can we not get discouraged when our scripts don't make it? Because it's like, this is one of these things too, is like, there's like the one you judged had 3,400 submissions, which is just so many freaking scripts.
That's
like
so many.
Yeah. What advice do you have? What do you look for when you're specifically reading a screenplay? And then, just any tips or advice for people that are submitting to these contests on like how they can maybe just get through them better,
I would say that the most important thing for my judge when I was judging was what script was displayed the most skill in terms of the fundamentals. There's no value to winning a competition and then having somebody who has career experience have to like explain to you something that you should have known already from a book. There's, I don't want to be explaining what a scene is, like I don't want to be explaining that like this scene was fun, but like, what did I learn from the scene? Or there was no conflict in the scene. That kind of basic stuff you need to be past some of those basic things. So, a script needs to show expertise, to be honest, and kind of like, it doesn't have to be like, cause you're innately skilled, but it just needs to show that you've like put a lot of effort into it and that you're not looking for feedback that is more kind of beginner level.
Gotcha.
I would say that I was looking for stories that felt fully realized, that were not just kind of tantalizing, but actually had some meat on the bone. So I was like, I could imagine what the final script after, revisions, what that magical thing would be. And I got very excited about that. I got excited about the scripts that I read, but imagining what some work would do and how it would polish them up. And I thought that in imagining that, I kind of got excited. So, that's important. I also would say that whatever you pick in terms of your genre, you have to be like, if you're not very funny, please don't write a comedy. If you don't really like watching mysteries, please don't write a mystery. If you don't like horror, please don't write a horror, because it needs to be the best of that. That's what these scripts need to be, is a really great example of, a story from this type of series. Yeah. And so there are a lot of, there were scripts that I read that had like a really interesting hook, but like the script wasn't really about the hook, or so like they didn't know what they had. You could tell they didn't really know what they had, or it was like a character who was like deadpan. That was their character, was that they were deadpan. And so there was like some thinness in terms of like character development. And, you're reading for enjoyment. If reading something is painful because you like have to keep going back and you don't understand something, or the dialogue is just like, you want the reader to be enjoying the read. So even if that means making it like easy to read, if you like, so really thick chunks of action writing and description, I mean, we should be past that by the time you're making it, to the end of a competition. So there wasn't lots of that, but like it should be an enjoying read where I feel like I can imagine what this show would be in its best form. Yeah. I mean, maybe that's not super specific or helpful, but I mean, the scripts that I read, I could see in some cases what they were aiming for. I could see what they'd been influenced by. I could see what they were excited about. And the one that I ultimately picked, I thought was the most fully realized, and I thought showed so much skill that I knew I could come and help get it closer to the finish line, opposed to like the middle section of the marathon. You know what I mean? Which is a different part of the process, because that comes from experience and practice. It's not like you can't get there. It's just, you just need to keep at it. And so the only way to keep moving forward is to move forward. The only way to do that is to keep writing. So you should just always keep writing and listen to the feedback. If people aren't responding to your work and they're not like kind of into it, that's feedback. If people love it and they keep giving you the same note, you're going to have to hear the note. So like the note, no matter, I wish that it were true that dumb people gave dumb notes, but unfortunately it doesn't matter who gives you the note. The note is a good note. The note came from somewhere. You have to learn how to hear it. That's one of the most important parts of being a writer, is receiving, processing, and then implementing feedback. Being able to do that and keep moving forward and feeling encouraged is incredibly important, and something that if you can keep yourself in a positive, I'm going to keep going, I'm going to keep learning, focus on the work, then all the other stuff will eventually fall into place. Just don't give up.
Yeah, I love it. That's an amazing way to wrap this up. And that actually was really good advice for people that are going to be submitting to these competitions. Like, you hit on those elements that I think probably most judges look for some of those same things when they're reading, like hitting on those things. So thank you so much for this. I have one more question, the most important question that I'm going to ask you this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
What's your favorite TV show that has inspired you the most? We'll end with that.
The Americans.
The Americans. I still need to finish it, but that is such an amazing show.
It is everything I wish I'd created it and written it myself. I'm so jealous. It's brilliant. I mean, there are so many great shows, but that one is, for me, absolute true perfection and like an ultimate goal to try and write that well.